This man actually slapped his wife just because she refused to drink water. The couple were both retired music teachers, living a peaceful and tender life in their later years. But one day, the wife, Anne, suddenly froze with a blank expression. Though she returned to normal a few minutes later, her husband, George, was deeply worried. Sure enough, Anne was soon diagnosed with a stroke. After surgery, the right side of her body was left paralyzed, and she could only sit in a wheelchair. Once home, Anne made George promise never to send her back to the hospital again. Out of love and respect for his wife, George agreed. From then on, George took on the role of a full-time caregiver. Every day, he tended to Anne with patience and devotion, never once complaining. One afternoon, George returned home to find Anne collapsed on the floor, the window beside her wide open. Since becoming paralyzed, she had been tormented by pain and humiliation. She wanted to preserve her final bit of dignity. She didn't want to be a burden. George said nothing. After that day, he stopped leaving the house entirely. Everything they needed was delivered to their door. To cheer her up, George invited one of their former students over and even bought her the latest model of a wheelchair. Anne was delighted to regain some mobility, and hope began to flicker in her heart again. She threw herself into rehabilitation exercises, but against illness, all effort can seem powerless. One day, Anne lost control of her bladder in bed. She bit her lip tightly, overwhelmed with shame. From then on, her condition deteriorated quickly. She could no longer take care of herself. George had no choice but to hire a nurse. But the nurse was rough. She yanked Anne's hair and even forced her to look in the mirror at her frail reflection. Heartbroken and furious, George decided to dismiss her. He still paid her double, as agreed. Yet instead of being grateful, the nurse insulted him. George replied calmly, "I hope that when you grow old, someone treats you the same way you've treated your patients." After firing the nurse, Anne's health worsened. She lost her ability to speak and began refusing food. No matter how much George begged, she refused to open her mouth. Eventually, George lost his patience. He tried to force her to drink, prying her mouth open, but Anne spat the water out. Stunned, George didn't know what to say. He hadn't meant to strike her, but the slap had already landed. Anne didn't get angry. Instead, she quietly drank the water. That night, she was unusually lucid. Lying in bed, she and George reminisced about their past. For a moment, it felt as if they had gone back in time, back to those warm afternoons when Anne played piano in the living room, and George watched, proud of his beautiful princess. But reality was merciless. The next morning, Anne began crying out in pain. George rushed to her side and soothed her until she grew calm. Then, gently, he picked up a pillow. Weeks later, police broke down the door. They found Anne lying peacefully in bed, surrounded by flowers. In case anyone's wondering, this movie is called Love.